This right here is a Canon Selfie CP1500. It's a mobile photo printer that I picked up just a few weeks ago, and I've been thoroughly enjoying using it. But it does have one problem, and that's this little barrel jack on the back. You see, it's such a small and compact printer, but you need to use a wall outlet in order to power it. You can't just plug it in with its USB-C port, that's only for data. You can't actually power the printer with that. And if you want to get a battery for it, those batteries are really expensive and some of them have been discontinued. It's just overall frustrating and difficult to figure out what battery I need to get. So it left me wondering, why would Canon make such a small, portable little printer that has so much power behind it, but make it reliant on being able to plug into a wall? My initial thought was maybe they wanted to sell the battery as a upsell or an add-on to it, but they don't really advertise that it's even compatible with a battery. Meaning that my only logical reasoning left would be that they just cheaped out and have been reusing the same power board from previous models. Now, I'm not going to tear this apart and go and look into that, it doesn't really matter, because for about $20 you can just go and grab one of these cables. So on this end you have a barrel plug. I'll put the exact dimensions of the plug up on screen right now, I can't remember them off the top of my head. And on the other end you have a USB-C cable. So I thought, why not try this and see if I can plug it into a USB-C power bank to power it mobily. Now the problem with doing this is that if you actually look at the power adapter, it's rated for outputting 24 volts. But it turns out that 20 volts is still within spec for the printer and it still will happily operate off of 20 volts. As long as your power bank can hold 20 volts and also the amount of wattage that the printer needs, which seems to be in the realm of somewhere between 40 to 60 watts. When printing. I've seen stories online of people who have tried to use USB-C power banks that aren't fully capable of delivering that, and sometimes the prints will stop or fail halfway through and the printer will just power off. So when today's sponsor Iniu reached out and offered to send over their P63 Cougar Battery Bank, I thought, well, let's give it a shot, let's see if it can power this printer. Turns out it most certainly can. It's got a 100 watt port right here, which happily outputs enough power for this printer. So if I go ahead and plug it into the barrel port right here, and then plug into the 100 watt port, I've got 72% currently, and just hold the power button, and the printer happily powers on. It'll go through, it'll print. In fact, I can actually even plug my A7 IV into the port over here, and not only can I print directly from the camera, it'll also show that it's charging. I didn't actually leave it plugged in long enough to see if it will actually charge, but from what I could tell, it was receiving power. It showed that it was charging, which is pretty impressive. I also did run a battery longevity test on this. Here you can see a time lapse where what I did was I connected my iPad using Wi-Fi to the printer wirelessly just to try to drain a bit more battery. And then I left it sitting for a few hours, and over the course of these hours, it didn't drop a single percent. So when I got back and I checked up on it and saw that it hadn't dropped a single percent, I decided to run some test prints. So I printed off 3 photos and I was able to get it down about 1%. Having done this testing, I think it's safe to say that you could definitely go through a few packs of paper with this battery bank as your power source. And honestly, I think using this, you could probably power a camera and this little printer and set up a mini photo booth for some event photography if you wanted to as well. That being said, obviously it's not optimal. The paper cost for this little printer is quite substantial, so you'd have to make sure that you're charging enough to recoup that cost. And the printing speed is a bit slow at about 40 seconds per print, so it can add up. So then, if you're going to get a battery bank to power one of these printers, what do you need to look for? Well, as I mentioned before, one of the ports needs to be able to output 20 volts. This port right here does 20 volts at 5 amps. So if we look at the power triangle, if you take 20 and you multiply it by 5, that's where you get your 100 watts from. Obviously, it's also capable of other voltages at different amperages, meaning different wattages as well, but for our purposes here, we only care about 20 volts since that's what the printer requires as a minimum to operate with. The capacity is also 25,000 milliamp hours or 91.25 watt hours, meaning, like I said, you can power this printer for an extremely long time, albeit I'm not quite sure what that time frame would be since I never hit that limit throughout my testing. Another thing to keep in mind is the size. Obviously this can fit in a pocket. It's quite dense, it's like a little brick, but it feels really nice in the hand with the soft touch plastic on the sides here, and I really like having the display showing me how much battery I have left. If your battery bank was to run out of power while the printer was turned on, I did test that, the printer doesn't seem to mind, but if you're mid-print, that print will fail, meaning that you waste that paper along with the die. So in conclusion, If you own a Canon selfie printer, it doesn't have to be the 1500. I believe they all use these little barrel jacks, and they all probably use the same power supply board, requiring and being able to work off of 20 volts of power. This cable, which I'll have linked in the video description, or something similar, along with a good quality power supply like this Iniu one, is a strong recommendation from me. It finally makes your little portable printer actually portable. If you're interested in picking up one of these, I'll also have a link down there in the video description as well. That's all for today, and I'll see you in the next video.